On today's Locked On Giants podcast, we welcome in Keith Sanchez, one half of the dynamic duo over on the Locked On NFL Draft podcast. Coach K will give us his evaluations on the Giants draft fits, sleepers, and much more. That's all coming your way next here on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Today's episode of the Locked On Giants podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150, win or lose. Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, P-Train, credentialed member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for Giants Country over on the Fan Nation Network. And a special welcome on into my everydayers, my Blue Crew community members, my newcomers, and everybody in between. You're all appreciated and loved by yours truly. Thank you for spending part of your day here with us at the Locked On Giants podcast. And if you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe to the channel. Click the little notification bell to get notified anytime I post new videos. And of course, like the video. It helps tremendously. And on today's Locked On Giants podcast, I'm very happy to welcome in Coach Keith Sanchez. He is the other half of the dynamic duo that is known as our Locked On NFL Draft Tandem, along with Damian Parson, who we've had on the show before. And Coach K is also a senior NFL draft analyst over on the Draft Network. So he has been knee-deep in film, and I appreciate him breaking away from the film to come on with me. So Coach K, welcome.
Oh, welcome. Thank you. I'm glad to be here. This is one of my favorite football podcasts, and I love talking to the Giants community. So I'm excited to be here.
They love you too, as I recall. So it was like just getting you back on, and I'm glad you were able to take some time. So Coach K, look, lots to talk about with the Giants, but I want to start off with a general question if I could. And that is, when you look at the draft, and I'm sure you've put together your own value boards and whatnot, who's going to be first round pick, second round, and so forth. Is there a cutoff at some point where the talent kind of drops off, or is this just a deep class regardless of the round and regardless of the position?
Yeah, so I'll say overall, and this is normal, right? Usually it's about 20 to 24 first round picks, right? And then you start kind of getting into that value of this is more second round guys. So if I'm picking at 27, might as well be picking at, 38 or something like that, or 40, right? Just for as the value of the prospect. So I think that's it's usually that first round or second round transition. But if you want to talk about the very top of the board, right, where the elite prospects are, and then heading into, hey, these are good first round prospects, I think there's probably about 5 guys. And so, the New York Giants sitting at pick 6, they're right on that threshold, right, of how the board could unfold for them. And if they're able to get their hands on one of these elite prospects.
Now, obviously for the Giants, the big topic is quarterback. And there's been some disagreement in the scouting community, or at least, the public scouting community, the draft analysts and whatnot. Who's a who's a legitimate top 6 pick, who's not. And I'm talking, of course, there's been talk that Michael Penix could sneak into the top 6. There's talk that J.J. McCarthy could be up there. Drake May, I've heard, can slide down, or he could be a top pick. How do you rate those guys?
Yeah, so I think there's a core forward. That's the term I've been using for this, and that's the Caleb Williams, Drake May, Jaden Daniels, and then a little bit of a gap, and then you get into the J.J. McCarthy conversation. So it's a core forward that we know would get drafted really high, but it's the 3 guys that I feel like are on, another tier. And then J.J. McCarthy he's that question mark, right? And it happens every draft, and it sometimes it turns out well, and then sometimes it doesn't turn out well for NFL teams. And it's, it's the highlights, the Zach Wilson situation. It's just those guys that haven't had a lot of reps, but they have all of the physical tools and the traits that you want in a quarterback. So it's kind of the 3 proven guys. And then J.J. McCarthy is the wild card because he has all of the physical traits you want.
Is there a quarterback in this draft class that you feel people are overplaying up versus underplaying?
Overplaying. I'll This is tough, right? Because you're about to put me in a tough situation. I'm going to say this, and I'm going to go back to the J.J. McCarthy conversation. And it's that JJ is a very talented guy, right? And over at the Locked On NFL Draft Podcast, like even in the midst of the season, you're talking about October, November, I was still saying, hey, watch out for this guy because he can be a first round pick. Now, I'm of the mindset I want to see you do it in college before I believe you can do it in the NFL. So while I thought he was a first round pick, right, just with quarterbacks and the value and how they get pushed up the board, I wasn't a component of him being the second quarterback off the board or the third quarterback off the board or a lock for a top 5 pick. So I think that's the guy that's kind of getting overplayed just a little bit. And I hate kind of saying it in that context. And then the quarterback is two guys that I think are kind of, if we can use sleepers, right? That's kind of being slept on. And one I think is Spencer Rattler, quarterback from South Carolina. Because listen, he was Caleb Williams before Caleb Williams, right? If we remember this, he was the guy at Oklahoma and Caleb Williams was backing him up. He was supposed to be the next Heisman. He was supposed to be the number 1 overall pick. And he didn't play well, but he went to South Carolina. And what happened was I seen a lot of maturity in him. And I got the opportunity to talk to him at the Senior Bowl. And he appears to have grown up a lot. And the arm talent is there, right? The IQ is there. This is a guy that's been playing high-level football since he was 16, right? He's been in the spotlight since then. So I think of a market like the New York Giants, right? It's not a whole lot that was going to bother him because if he was going to tank, right, and be done with football, he'd have done that a long time ago because he's been under the spotlight. So Spencer Rattler is one guy. And then I still like Michael Penix as a thrower because I watched him at the Senior Bowl, and something that he did that he didn't do a lot at Washington was play under center, and him rolling out, him, the play action, the boot stuff, doing different things with him like that. While he, I guess it was plays where he had to run, right? Like had to get him out the pocket, design QB, bootlegs and things like that. He showed really well. And I know a question mark for Michael Penix is his ability to play on a run, but I think that's more of him improvising versus when it's the design QBs get out of the pocket and those type of plays.
Obviously, with the Giants, they can stay put, they can move up, they can move back. I think it's pretty safe to say that Caleb Williams will probably go number 1 after overall.
Yep.
After that, it's probably a toss-up. Is there a quarterback maybe after Caleb Williams that you feel the Giants should absolutely move heaven and earth to get?
I think either Jaden Williams or Jaden Daniels. I'm sorry, either Jaden Daniels or Drake May. I like both of those guys, and we have to remember that Brian Daboll, when he was hired from the New York Giants, he was one of the best offensive minds in the NFL and college football. Right, he had that stint at Alabama, and then in NFL, he was the guy that was responsible for kind of reviving Josh Allen or turning Josh Allen into who he is. So I want to get him another quarterback that has high level tools and skill set. I think the Daniel Jones situation, and in my opinion, I think it's ran its course in the sense of the fact of there's no slight to Daniel Jones, but we know exactly what he is at this moment, right? In the box that he kind of lives in. If I'm Brian Daboll, give me either one of those two guys, whether that's Drake May or Jaden Daniels, and let me design some different things to, get them outside of the pocket. And we seen what he was able to do for just a brief stint with Tyrod Taylor, right? Letting Tyrod Taylor use his legs last year, win a couple games, and get this offense kind of gaining some momentum. So I think of a Drake May who is a mobile quarterback but can throw the football at a high level, and then Jaden Daniels who showcased his speed and athleticism this past year could be some fun options for the New York Giants offense.
I've seen opinions that Drake May is Daniel Jones 2.0. Do you agree with that?
No, and that's not fair to Drake May, right? And I think it's just such a simple comparison of, it's probably height, weight, stature situation. It's like, oh, we'll just call him that, right? And I mean, even you've seen the simple comparisons of, another North Carolina quarterback. So you know who he is? He's Mitchell Trubisky, right? And that's no fair, and it's unfun, right? And you even think about my time at LSU, right? What if everybody just threw the LSU quarterback notion on Joe Burrow, right? And that's what everybody said. But guess what? Joe Burrow is one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. So I like to look at it from that perspective of every prospect is their own person. I like NFL comps, but just to go ahead and throw that out there, that's not fair. That's not fair to Drake May.
Drake May obviously doesn't have the injury history, which is a big factor. And as you said, at this point, we kind of know what Daniel Jones is and what he is not.
Yep.
Now, Coach K, let's talk a little bit about the value between receiver and quarterback, because obviously receiver 1 is a position that the Giants need. They in my opinion, need a quarterback. Now, whether they agree with me is another story, but I think a lot of people will agree
I
that
I
they need
agree
a
with you,
quarterback.
Patricia. They need a
Well,
quarterback.
that's all that matters. But anyway, my question to you is there better value for the Giants? Is it more advantageous for them to go receiver in the first round, assuming that those three of those top four quarterbacks are gone? Is it better to go receiver and get the better value there and maybe punt the quarterback decision to day two? Or again, do you just move heaven and earth if you have a chance?
Yeah, so this team has holes, right? So it's difficult for them to just simply say move heaven and earth, right? Because you'll be probably leveraging a lot of draft capital, right, to move up, and then that's the draft capital that you want to use to fill out the offensive line, and you have to replace the safety, and you want some cornerback help, and things like that. So it's hard to say that part. I will say this: sitting at pick number 6, if there's one of those three quarterbacks, and maybe I'll even say four, if JJ McCarthy is there, because I believe that the Giants are in position to where you can't do what you did again last year, right? I feel like Giants fans, they need something exciting, at least something to get excited to headed into the year, right? But if you're telling me all we're going to do is copy and paste from what happened last year, it's kind of like, doesn't excite me a little bit. So if one of those four quarterbacks, I say go with that. And then if one of the three wide receivers, I envision Marvin Harrison Jr. most likely being gone, right? But if you can get your hands on Rome Odunze or Malik Neighbors, you definitely go with that. And looking at the Giants wide receiver core with a Wan'Dale Robinson and a Jalen Hyatt, I would probably prefer Rome Odunze just because they need a bigger bodied guy now, right? Like we have our smaller, shiftier wide receivers, right? Go get a big bodied X wide receiver, somebody that kind of replicates Keenan Allen, one of those type of players, and get him out there.
All right, we got more coming up with Coach K. Don't go anywhere. Hey, Giant fans, it's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball's in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon today and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, with Coach Keith Sanchez, who is one half of the Locked On NFL Draft dynamic duo with Damian Parson. And of course, he is also a senior talent evaluator over on the Draft Network. You can find all his evaluations over there, as well as listen to him and Damian Parson. They are cranking out the material these days, must listen to, and they're really good. I highly recommend them. And Coach K, we've been talking about first round for the Giants. Let's talk about day 2 and day 3, because that's where, the challenge really is to find value picks at different positions. Now, when you stack up the depth of each position group, quarterbacks, receivers, interior defensive line, and so forth, where is it more advantageous to find value, say in day 2, as opposed to waiting to day 3?
Right. I think offensive line and wide receiver are both situations that I feel comfortable in. I think the New York Giants have the number 47 pick, right?
I think
And then they
so.
have the number 70th pick. So I feel comfortable with finding O-line and wide receivers in both of those situations, to be completely honest. I think if you're a team and you have offensive line help, this is the draft to fix your offensive line. If you didn't fix your offensive line after this draft, and that's whether that's offensive tackle or interior offensive line, then you did something wrong. And then also wide receiver, man, there's so much depth here. I liken it to, and I don't know if football fans how much pay attention to like the Green Bay Packers, right? And how they were able to get wide receivers like Dontavian Wicks in the 6th, 7th round. I think that's going to happen with some of these very talented wide receivers, that some of them are just naturally going to fall because other teams are going to need other positions. So that's another position. So the offensive line position and the wide receiver position are definitely positions where I think that you can still grab good starters on day 2, like high level starters.
What about in terms of the classes that, when you look at the different position groups that maybe aren't as strong? What are some of those groups?
Yeah, the cornerback class, I think I don't think it's like of years past where there was a Christian Gonzalez from last year and then a Derek Stingley and a Sauce Gardner the year before. I'm not sure it's that. think it's an okay class. I think there's value once you get in appropriate value. Let me say that once you get into the late second, early third round, right? I think that's where the value is. Tight end is not a very deep class at all. There are some serviceable tight ends or tight ends that you want to use in specific situations, especially if you have, two tight end sets or things like that. So you may find a blocking tight end, or you may find a strictly receiving tight end. So that's another position that's not as deep. And then I'm trying to think of running back. Running back would be a very interesting, and that's an interesting topic for the New York Giants, right? With Saquon Barkley going elsewhere. And then now I'm trying to think of the running back from Oklahoma. I really like him too. That's on the New York
Benson?
Giants.
The kid they just signed, you mean?
Eric Gray. I'm sorry, Eric
Eric
Gray
Gray.
from last
Yeah,
year. And
okay.
I really liked Eric Gray as a running back, but I think he's the type of guy he's going to need a running mate. So for the New York Giants, it because it's not a top heavy class, like you're not going to find a Saquon Barkley replacement, right? You have to find a complementary piece to the room that you have. So yeah, running back, tight end, probably and cornerback are probably the positions where there's not the elite prospects, but there's some good prospects, but you have to find the complementary pieces to your team.
Now, let me get inside your mind as far as roster building goes, because I don't know how far you have gotten into looking at next year's draft class, but they have said, it's been said that the quarterback talent isn't as deep, that, some of the other positions this year that are deep are not as good next year. How much pressure then do you think that put on a team that needs a quarterback or needs an offensive tackle or needs a cornerback to, maybe bump up the value, if you will?
Yeah, so Ken, do you want to shift it? This is the Locked On in New York Giants podcast. So let's shift it to even team building for the Giants, right? I think it's very important that Brian Daboll, the GM, and ownership are all on the same page, right? Because if you talk about team building and just development, I am of the thought process of building your team till they're ready to have a rookie quarterback. And the reason I say this is because we've seen so many instances of third rounders, fourth rounders, Brock Purdy's situation, mystery relevant, come in, right, and then be adequate starting quarterbacks. But what we've seen was that they went to fairly good situations, right? So I'm of the mindset of building the roster around. I would like if they come to Brian Daboll, come to the GM and say, hey, look, we're going to have a 2-3 year process with this. So we're going to fill in some holes. And then when we're ready to get a quarterback, we'll go ahead and get a quarterback and fill out the rest of this team.
What is it, going back to the quarterbacks, the top four, what would they bring to the offense that right now you think the Giants are missing with Daniel Jones at the helm, other than, of course, a cleaner injury history?
Yeah, it's the opportunity for big plays, right? Like I think the New York Giants have to become less predictable, less of and I hate to say ground and pound like that's all it was, especially with Saquon Barkley, right? But I think the best phrase is they have to become a less predictable offense. They have to open some things up, and there has to be the opportunity for big plays. They drafted the guys like Wan'Dale Robinson, right? Who is this shifty slot wide receiver. You drafted Jalen Hyatt because he was an explosive vertical threat, but you have to give him the opportunity to be the explosive vertical threat, right? So a guy like Jaden Daniels will provide you the opportunity for a big play on the ground and then take a deep shot. And then a guy like Drake May will give you the opportunity for that. I look at with Daniel Jones, and I just see that it's capped, right? And we look across the NFL, there are certain quarterbacks stylistically that fit with certain teams, right? And Daniel Jones playing, and I don't even dislike the phrase game manager, right? I'm perfectly fine with having a game managing quarterback, but you can't have a game managing quarterback when I need you to be a do-it-all guy, right? Like it has to perfectly fit this situation. And the New York Giants, the way they're currently constructed, they need a quarterback that can give them that extra oomph, right? That can push everything forward. I think about what there was the 2 Super Bowls that they won with Eli Manning. The way that team was currently constructed, right? They could get away with Eli Manning managing some games here and there and doing things like that because of how that team is constructed. I don't think the New York Giants, as of now, is structured like that. So they need a guy that can be able to put up some points and make some plays on his own.
One position we haven't really talked about, and I think it's what I call a sneaky need, is interior defensive line depth. The Giants have Dexter Lawrence, who we all I think can agree is a stud. Then they have a veteran, Raheem Nunez-Roches, next to him, who's mainly a run stuffer. And then they have a couple of young guys, Jordan Riley, who was a 7th-round pick last year, DJ Davidson, who I think was a 5th-round pick the year before. Can you talk a little bit about the interior defensive line depth in this draft class and who might be a good fit to help bring out the best in Dexter Lawrence, kind of in the way that Leonard Williams did before he was traded?
Yeah, there's a couple guys that I like a whole lot. So I'm start at the I guess I start at the top, right? And I don't know if the New York Giants in position to spend a late first, early second on, but Florida State's edge rusher, well, not it, but interior defensive lineman Braden Fisk. I like this guy a lot. This is a lunch pail and hard hat type of football player. He's gonna get after it. He's scrappy. Then the next guy I'm gonna bring up is Clemson's interior defensive lineman Rook Aurora. I believe that's how you say it. Really explosive guy, physical, heavy-handed, can play the run well, but also has that upside as a pass rusher. And then the last guy we'll talk about that I really like is Alabama's interior defensive lineman, Justin Igboigbe. And when you think about Alabama, you think about Georgia now, right? And they have the same, kind of these 5 tech defensive ends, play to run heavy technicians. He's cut from that same cloth, and I really like him a lot. He's a technician against the run, and I think honestly he's a high level plug and play player as a rookie. So those are the 3 guys sitting at the very, I guess, top of my board that I don't think get discussed a lot. But those 3 guys I do like a whole lot.
Earlier in the pod, you said the Giants have a lot of needs, which I agree with you on that. Where do you think most of those needs are, though? I mean, to me, I look at this roster and I think they could use a few more pieces on the defensive side. But, you can also make the case, obviously, quarterback, wide receiver, additional offensive line, specifically an offensive tackle. But where do you see like the biggest needs on which side of the ball?
Yeah, I think is vital in that's why I wanted to kind of put everything specifically for the New York Giants, right? Because holistically, I have an approach, right, of you build your defense and your run game and things like that. But looking at the New York Giants specifically, I just think they're in a time where they have to find an identity offensively. So if I'm the New York Giants and I wouldn't care, right, if I'm the GM and I'm sitting there and my first 3 picks are offensive players, whether that's, quarterback, offensive line, wide receiver, right? If I hit that trio and I feel like we've gotten better offensively, I feel good about this because we have to be able to roll things out. And what happens is offensively, if teams know that you're not going to do much offensively, they walk in with a whole different game plan, right? And so they're more conservative. So it's hard to even test out your defenders or know what your defense is going to be because of how teams are playing you offensively, because they're not scared of your offense. So I would go offense just to try to start building an identity. You have to get something going. Losing Saquon Barkley, in my opinion, was huge. You have to figure out who's going to be that, that locker room guy, who's going to be that guy that gets everybody excited and have them feeling like we can win this game. So you have to find an offensive identity.
All right, we got more coming up with Coach K right after this. Hey, Giant fans, passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. And with all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. So go on and keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay's Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm Patricia Traynor, your host, with Coach Keith Sanchez of Locked On NFL Draft and a senior draft analyst over at the Draft Network. Check him out. And of course, follow him on Twitter. He is at the Talent Code. So make sure you're following him, especially with this draft. It's going to be here in less than 2 weeks.
Less than 2 weeks. It's crazy.
Keith, what are, every year, the fans, the media, they have one perspective on the draft that varies greatly from the scouting community. And eventually, the 2 sides start to catch up to each other. Is there a specific trend that maybe the scouting community was was all over maybe a couple months ago that now those of us on the outside who aren't part of that community are starting to catch up to?
Hmm. I'm trying to think. I think so, and I think we're starting to hear more now about the quarterbacks that we talked about, the Michael Penix, the Spencer Rattler, the Bo Nix, because I like I said, I think the talking points were Caleb Williams, Drake May, Jaden Daniels, right? And that's because, outside community, we kind of look at production and numbers, right? Wins and losses, who's on our TV, who's in the championship games, right? Things like that. And then now I think the NFL draft community, right, is just finally starting to catch up with the NFL scouting communities because they've been doing their due diligence, right? They have these scouts that attend these games and, they're watching the games and they're trying to figure out why is what happening, right? You talk about a Spencer Rattler with, I think South Carolina might have went 6-6, right? So us as college football fans, we're not watching that on TV, right? So it's kind of a out of sight, out of mind type situation. But I think now the draft community is starting to catch up with the scouting community as far as doing their due diligence. I remember before the Senior Bowl, right? And not a brag, but just the conversation of was that I told people like, hey, Spencer Rattler is probably a guy that's going to walk out of here as an MVP. And he went in there and he performed well and walked out of there. So you can best believe like a situation where there's NFL scouts all over the place and you go into that spot, unfamiliar territory, and you perform well, then NFL scouts are definitely going to be on to that. And I think now the NFL draft community is catching up to, hey, quarterbacks 5, 6, and 7. If we can get these guys at the top of the second round, potentially bottom of the first round, we can feel really good about that.
If you were to kind of whip out your crystal ball and say, okay, the Giants absolutely can't make this mistake, but yet it's a mistake that you could see them making, what would you pick?
Oh man. I think if they stand pat and don't get a quarterback, I don't foresee that being a great situation, to be honest. Even if they bring in a wide receiver, I just, man, it's gonna sound like a Daniel Jones slight, but I just don't see how much Daniel Jones is going to be able to get him the football. So I think if they walk away this draft without a quarterback and say that we're fully committed to Daniel Jones, that's the biggest crystal ball mistake, I believe. I think they need to start being, I won't say more aggressive, but more assertive in their efforts to bring in another quarterback to compete with Daniel Jones.
Yeah, I think if they come out of this draft and they don't take a quarterback, I firmly believe the fans will burn down the building. You got a lot of people, again, Daniel Jones's injury history is a big concern of mine. And as you said earlier, he kind of is what he is at this point. And, if we're still asking questions about him after all this time, is that really a good thing? I don't think that it is.
No, I don't either. I think we know what it is, and like we said, for this team as currently constructed and where we're trying to go, right? You're talking about the New York Giants. We just simply need more, and it doesn't mean that Daniel Jones is not an NFL quarterback. He's just not great for this situation.
Now, Coach, when you were at LSU, obviously, I'm sure you were involved with a little bit of recruiting there as well.
Yep.
How much of a factor are the intangibles? Like, for example, the ability to handle the media or the pressure. I mean, how much does that factor in, especially into positions like, the high profile ones, quarterback, cornerback, receiver, the position players and so forth?
It is important, probably the second most important thing, and I will even put it over some honestly, physical traits, right? Is your mental and your mentality, especially quarterback, right? And media is everywhere, right? There's so many different versions of it. Instagram, Twitter, right? You cut off the TV and cut on the TV. It's all over there. There's Twitch. There's so many versions of media so people can get their opinions out that if you're not tough skinned, especially playing in a market like New York, then that can mentally spiral. So I find it so important. And that's what I've been doing this draft process. I've been paying attention to the interviews. If I have conversations with these guys, paying attention to their mentality, because that adversity is going to hit in some way or fashion, right? It's happened to the very best in Tom Brady. Tom Brady has had low lights. He's had low moments. He's had moments where his personal life, right, was splattered all over ESPN. And the question is, how does he handle that? And I've seen those situations make or break players more than their actual physical talent is them, hey, messing up in the game, and then they turn on the TV or they look at Twitter, right? And they go right down the drain. And this was something that I noticed too, like what we realized, because, we're a couple years older than these, young men that's 21 entering the NFL draft, is that we know how to simply put our phone down and kind of block out the noise or the media noise, right? But Twitter and Instagram has been a part of their life almost their entire life. And I've noticed some of our players, even at halftime, they would check their phones, right, to see what people are saying. We're talking about halftime. So it's definitely crazy. And so I definitely want to find that guy that is mentally tough and that is ready for the moment, especially being in an environment like New York.
Final question for you, and this is
Yep.
kind of a big picture type of deal. The first round, let's talk about that for a second. We can assume, and I know that's a dangerous word to use, but we can assume that the first 3 picks will probably be quarterbacks in some way, shape, or form. After that, you have some question marks regarding 4 and 5, what's going to happen. So I want to get your take on how you see those first few picks unfolding, especially where there's some questions as to, will the Cardinals look to trade down? Will the Chargers look to trade down? Will this team look to trade up? So how do you what makes the most sense, I guess, at the top of the first round? And what do you think is the key as far as which team and what they do being the key to setting the stage for the rest of the first round?
Yep. So I think the first 2 teams are a lock with the Bears and the Commanders. If you're the Patriots, and I think if somebody like the Minnesota Vikings wants to trade up, I think they're another team that they should potentially trade back, because I don't think their team is currently constructed without the wide receiver help, with offensive line issues. It's currently constructed to kind of foundationally hold up a rookie quarterback. So I think that's a team that you should consider, maybe the Minnesota Vikings swapping places. Pick number 4, the Arizona Cardinals. I know there's been a fun conversation of the Cardinals moving back and then moving back up and doing it all of those type of things. Sit there. It's very rare that you run across a talent like Marvin Harrison Jr. Sometimes it's not about the upside or right what you can do as far as, oh, this guy is a little bit more explosive. Sometimes in drafting and evaluating, it's about taking the double or the triple, right? And that's what Marvin Harrison Jr., he's a for sure triple at the end of the day, and you draft him. So if I'm the Cardinals, I'm drafting Marvin Harrison Jr. The Chargers, I would trade back. And the reason I think they will is that we have to remember that while they have Justin Herbert, right, and it'd be cool to get an offensive weapon, their head coach is Jim Harbaugh, right? This is a guy that, believes in running a football. So they probably trade back, get an offensive lineman, recoup some more picks, and then fill out the rest of this roster. Then that leaves the Giants right there with the opportunity to draft a quarterback. So there we go, Patricia.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see. I still think, as of right now, until I hear or get indication otherwise, I think they stay tight and they get a receiver,
I think so
because
too.
a receiver can hit the ground running for them right away, whereas a quarterback has to, they'll probably have that kid sit for a bit. Not to say that, that's why they should not draft a quarterback, but, like you were saying, get all the pieces involved. And they don't yet have a number 1 receiver now. Could they get one in the second round? I don't know. Probably, I would think, right?
Yep. No, I think so. I think they could definitely find a quarterback. Hopefully, I would say hopefully, because this is a draft where a lot of teams need quarterbacks, which is crazy. And then they were not active in the quarterback market either. I thought that they would have been, you see guys like Justin Fields or Sam Howell, right? They go for late round picks. And I'm by no means saying that those are going to be NFL superstars or that they even played really good football in the past. The only conversation is to potentially do something different and shake the room up some for Daniel Jones to compete. And I was surprised that they didn't really get into that category. So we'll see how that turns out. And then, yeah, I think they probably will end up with a wide receiver. And if I'm them, I go Rome Odunze.
Yeah, I like a Dunze too for them. But of course, we will see, because now you hear them linked to Drake May. You also hear that the quarterback position is going to be heavy lifting between Jones and Drew Lock, who they signed. So it's so much fun. The
Yeah, it
smoke's
is.
going to clear up in a couple of weeks. We'll have our answers. Coach K, you'll be all over it, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah,
So
definitely. It
we'll
will.
have to check back in with you, as well as your partner in crime over there, Damian Parson, the dynamic duo, ladies and gentlemen. Please check them out on the Locked On NFL Draft podcast. And also you can check them out on the Draft Network, where they do such a great job. Folks, that's going to do it for us here on today's Locked On Giants podcast. As always, thank you for tuning in, spending part of your day with us. Coming up on the Locked On Giants podcast, I'm going to have the author of The Beast on the show. Dane Brugler of The Athletic will be on the show with me, and we'll have some more surprises for you as we get a little bit closer to draft day. Exciting times. For Keith Sanchez, I'm Patricia Traina. Giant fans, we will see you again tomorrow.